Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, I have the honor, privilege, and pleasure of welcoming my brother in battle, Brother Stephan Beyer, back to the podcast. And in these series of dialogues and conversations, Brother Stephan Beyer always teaches us and educates us on issues that need to be looked at within our community and within the greater world as a whole. So, with the latest episode that we're going to do, we're going to focus more on the troll forums and the COINTELPRO agents that we find in the spiritual communities. And we're going to try to see what is it that people need to be aware of. So, without further ado, welcome and Nora Lakem to our brother Stephan.
So, I've been troubled by some of the news lately, and I think it's important to review how America got to where it's currently at. So, Donald Trump's election to become president wasn't the most natural situation. If we recall, there were actually signs the night he got elected saying, "Thanks, Comey." And that was alluding to the FBI mysteriously, right before the election, kind of tied Hillary Clinton to Anthony Weiner and kind of essentially made um, use this clown, Anthony Weiner, who apparently was, if you want to say there's a good cop, bad cop situation, this guy was like deliberately making a fool of himself, doing everything wrong to be the most toxic person. And the FBI perfectly set it up right before the election. So that was what was on a lot of voters' minds. I don't think anybody with a daughter wanted them on the internet talking to Anthony Weiner, put it that way. And, we got 4 years of Trump, Lord knows how many dead people because of essentially FBI and informant manipulation of the election. So, with some of the antics that we see from Kanye West recently, one wonders if he's going to be sort of this new way to steer elections. Kanye West recently hired, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce its name, is Greek, but Milo Yiannopoulos. It's not actually his original last name. He adjusted it. I think it's his grandmother's surname. But this guy came out in favor of underage sexual interactions between young boys and men, and later tried to switch that around and said that he was the victim here and he was only justifying what happened to him, some sort of Stockholm syndrome or some such. And um, this is a really amazing type of I mean, nobody would hire this guy, I think, if you actually wanted to win an election. Similar to Anthony Weiner, this is just as toxic as can be, and will probably, my cat sometimes likes to play. I've been trying to teach him to be less feral. He's a rescue. I'm going to just let him attack me for a little bit. But, all right, 1 second. I'm going to have to put him in the other room. He's getting a little bit clawy. 1 second.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries, brother. And until brother Stephan gets back, this is absolutely right because a lot of these different actors that are there in this field that we're dealing with, everyone you got to realize they're all playing a role. They're all actors. They're trained to a certain extent. And when you do get these people in a court of law, let's say if somebody goes after them legally and lawfully with evidence, that because informants and COINTELPRO, they like to smear, defame, and slander people, right? We all dealt with that in this community. So when you do get them in front of a judge with evidence, police reports, et cetera, then their client will say, "Oh, my client is." Their lawyer will say, "Excuse me, that my client is just a performance artist." So that's how these people try to defend themselves and saying, "Oh, this person so and so is just playing a character. This is not his real name. He's really this, and this." So I've seen this time and time again, especially in these cases and what really happens.
We're kind of anticipating something like that from Andrew Tate, who seems to be another side of this coin. Somebody who deliberately does something wrong, and essentially what um, currently a lot of the surveillance has come out is on communities of faith. So there was some situations where the Catholic Church and Muslims have both been spied on. So people on all sides of the aisle are equal opportunity targets for those in power. Um, so one of the guys who's very interesting, who was investigated by the FBI but does not seem to be arrested, and may or may not be turning state's evidence, it's hard to say, is sort of a hometown character who grew up not far from where I live. I walk by his mother's house every day. His mother lives between my niece, nephew, brother, and sister in law and my parents' old apartment. So it's right there in this area. He was the head of the student council at the high school I graduated years later. Afterward, he's younger than me. But Kanye West gave Nick this job, paid him $30,000 after Nick was involved in the January 6th storming of the Capitol. Nick also received a very large sum of Bitcoin from overseas that was investigated by the FBI. So he's done a lot of things that have gotten him connected with COINTELPRO like people. And this person ends up meeting with Donald Trump, with Kanye West. Um, and now they're going to be working with Milo Yiannopoulos. And this sort of is reminiscent of when the FBI was supporting the North American Man Boy Love Association and trying to run it as a sting operation and as a boogeyman. And obviously, that created a lot of blowback against people who had nothing to do with it, who just happened to be homosexuals living their own lives. But when the FBI creates a scandal like that and presents it as like something norm, they want more money for their investigation. So they want the biggest problems possible. You can't succeed as an informant without lots of publicity. So they want the biggest stories they can get. And these can get to a ridiculous scale, such as tipping a presidential election, which seems to have happened with Comey directly influencing the election of Donald Trump and then pretending he was against it. Like he didn't know somehow. Like he was the only one in America who didn't know, despite having all of the tools to know. I also sort of want to do a comparison of Andrew Tate and Andrew or Andy or Anjem Choudhury or whatever he's calling himself these days. These people who pretend to revere the Quran, pretend to be Islamic, but really are just trying to enable spying and crackdown on Muslims. And similarly, Nick is essentially harming people who really, he's trying to do the same thing to Catholics that Andrew Tate and Anjem Choudhury did to the Islamic community in England and in Europe. This has a big influence on elections. It influences crowds when these types of clown characters get famous for being bad and doing things that nobody wants to do. These guys wear their misogyny on their sleeves. Um, it's hard to understand. I mean, I know that the Tates have a sister, and Nick has a mother who somehow manages to support him with this nonsense. But these guys essentially justify violence against women, abuse, and presumably Nick has his own issues where he was investigated with the FBI. So presumably he needs to get somebody else. He's going to sacrifice somebody else and say, "Hey, give me immunity. I'll give you so and so." And this type of situation is very corrupt. There seems to be developing corporations of troll farms that sort of specialize in this niche market. And so it happens on the very large scale, and it also happens on the small scale in fringe spiritual communities. And we've even noticed it in our Sufi order, some of the harassment and gang stalkers that we've had, and sort of the good cop, bad cop scenario. So, sort of this hilarious guy, I don't want to give him too much attention, but so there's this guy who claims to be Polish, and some sort of chosen figure because of the throne of Elam or something, a bizarre interpretation of a prophecy from the Old Testament, which he wants to connect to the Bionic community. Now, the thing about this is it makes absolutely no sense, and he's completely illiterate. Like we got one of his posts where he's talking about Muslims praying 5 times a day. Well, the the Bayan and the Bab come from a Shia spiritual path. So I mean, if it's typically 3 times a day. So it's like, um, he doesn't even know. He knows basically what shows up top on his search results. He doesn't do enough reading to even follow through on that to know that, like, if you're going to follow the writings of the Bible, you're going to have to approach that from the context of 12 or Shia or Gnostic Shia. You don't, it's not the kind of Islam that most Europeans are most familiar with. So it's like they don't even know it exists, and they're quoting the wrong tradition that's not even in context with it. Combine that with Dale Husband's newfound Shia scholarship. Apparently, he's an expert. I mean, I have to struggle with translation. It takes me hours to go through this stuff. But Dale has, I don't know. Uh, he, these guys, these trolls that we have to deal with are stalking, have this tendency similar to Andrew Tate, Anthony Weiner, and Milo Yiannopoulos, have this tendency to have a very permissive attitude towards sex abuse because they don't really know what they're going to be an informant. Is the guy going to be, are we going to try and turn him into the authorities for violence or sex abuse? Well, they just cast a wide enough net. So they have these bizarre caricatures. And it would be funny, except we've got the example of, 4 years of Donald Trump over one of the FBI's lies. So this is a very serious thing that they're doing. People were all focused on Dominion systems and the election. The real thing is that with fake news and with informant controlled fake news with the system, um, you don't have to steal elections at the voting box when you can get thousands of parents to be horrified of, oh my God, that's not who I want my daughter talking to online. Nobody wants their daughter talking to Andrew Tate. Nobody wants their nephew or son talking to Milo Yiannopoulos, and nobody wants them talking to Ali, Alexander, or Nick. Um, and like this has a huge influence on elections. One has to wonder what Kanye West is up to. Did he get caught with tax evasion or something else, and why he's just burning down his own life and associating with these characters? One of the things I find very odd about Kanye West, and I mean, other than his connection to Nick and Milo, is that Kanye West doesn't criticize, he's got these vague anti-Semitic statements, but he doesn't have any actual justice criticism of Israel. Nothing about the refugees, nothing about the proxy war, nothing about the issues where people in Israel are drafted in the military as kids, and if they don't want to join the military, they have to go to jail. And our wonderful media is trying to present it as, the people of faith in the Orthodox yeshivas are somehow draft dodgers because, they want to pursue spiritual studies and not be involved in this conflict. And It's like they uh, they have these sort of vague attacks on the Jews, but they don't see that there are Jewish victims of this oppression. And there's plenty of Palestinian victims, the victims in the Golan Heights who are predominantly Druze, who had their land annexed. The Golan Heights is not Israel. That's legally Syria, regardless of what governments are going to try and claim. Nobody has the right to annex land like that. International law is pretty solid. No, the Golan Heights is not Israel. And um, so there's all sorts of various minorities that are oppressed here, but those aren't issues that they want to talk about. They'd rather talk about Jewish space lasers or some crazy nonsense. And that's sort of it's a giveaway that if you can't see the problem with justice with the state of Israel, the huge divide they have now with who's in power with Netanyahu versus the courts. I mean, they own. You talk about something real, they want to bring up aliens. It's like aliens are an interesting topic, but they're not necessarily relevant to the workers and the people who are suffering as refugees, the people who are homeless. So I want to also speak briefly because I did some research on what Nick is talking about just now, and he is celebrating the death of a homeless person on the subway in New York. Now, he's basically saying that killing a person who's loud and poor is heroic. This is a baffling and disturbing thing. I'm very disturbed by it. One of the reasons why you don't see me a lot, why I usually do my videos without my face on them, is I had brain treatment yesterday because I have a rather horrific form of Tourette's called corporalia, I believe it's pronounced. So basically, I will occasionally say horribly offensive things involuntarily, kind of randomized. They might be I love, I hate, I want statements. Sometimes they come out in rather violent or threatening manners. I am able to immediately apologize and say, sorry, that was a tick, that was Tourette's. But it's very disturbing to me that somebody is actually going to try to say, yeah, it's heroic. Let's portray attacking somebody who's loud and poor as a heroic thing. This obviously can, you know, be used to justify a hate crime against disabled people. I am currently on disability in part because of this tic Tourette disorder. We've basically researched, and with the help of the Masonic Lodge of Illinois, they've helped develop a new treatment where they're doing TMS, transmagnetic cranium stimulation, on my premotor motor cortex, and it gives me a lot more ability to control the tics. I've had very few tics since my last treatment, and I'm much more capable with this. Unfortunately, the insurance will not cover it. TMS is only covered for people who aren't poor. It's on Medicare for disability, but if you're on I have to somehow cancel my Medicaid in order to get this covered. But even then, what works best for me is that we have a custom treatment on my premotor cortex, which is basically right here on the top of the head. Basically, they can only have it funded because this is such an important treatment. There is, Medicare does cover it, but they only cover it for depression. But there are uh, much larger problems when people have tics and Tourette's. It's kind of like a neurological short circuit going off in your language center or your motor control, and you have an unwanted involuntary reaction, like somebody hits your knee and your knee kicks. You don't really have the ability to control that. And it can also work just sort of randomly selecting words. And I have the extreme unluckiness. This is only about 1/10 of people with Tourette's. Mine is the stereotypical offensive statements. So, things I would not want to say. and stuff that could get me in trouble. Most of the stores I go to are pretty familiar with me. They have to be. And most of my community is very supporting. Uh, when I go to the market, it's very easy for, people to know, um, and remember me, and most people are very helpful. But the idea that violence is being advocated, as somehow heroic, against poor people who are loud, and sometimes my ticks are loud and they're unfortunate. I really wish I didn't have them. But Nick is essentially advocating violence directly against people like me. Um, and I mean, sometimes I'm loud because I'm angry. There have been things that make me angry. I see a lot of injustice in the world, but these ticks are not something I control. It doesn't matter if I'm angry or not. Um, these statements are going to come out. Sometimes they are kind of funny. One of the funnier ones is I hate potatoes. This one originally started because a friend of mine, she took me out with her fiance and her fiance's daughter. And her fiance's daughter was this nice young lady, I think about 5 or 6. So, I don't know if you've ever eaten with young children, but once they get finicky and in the sort of you have to reward me for eating, they want like dessert for every bite. So, one of the things I was thinking of is don't say anything bad about food because, the child might become more combative to eating. Well, the moment I think I don't want to say anything bad about food, one of my reoccurring ticks, that's when it started, and it's I hate potatoes. I've had other ones sort of start like that where I realize there's something I really don't want to say. And the moment I think that, that's what comes out. Sometimes they're a little bit more random. And about 1 out of 10 times they're positive. I also will tick I want potatoes or I love potatoes because I've also sort of learned I don't want to say that I want things. Like I don't want to say I want money around people. Then people start, guarding their wallet. One of my ticks also is I hate money, I love money, or I want money. And these are all things that normally are topics I would prefer to avoid. I'm not really going to just go up to people and remind them, hey, I'm poor, because obviously with Tourette's like this, it's not easy to work in customer service. That's not a career path that's open to me. My most successful jobs have been working at Chinese restaurants where the owners didn't understand English. That's where I've been most successful. And I've had these ticks for years, but they've gotten a lot worse over the last 3 years. And it's it's horrifying, from my own standpoint, that this guy is going to advocate violence against people who are homeless, people who have either neurological or mental issues. Um, Really, in my opinion, the mental issue seems to be a Marine who chose to put somebody in a chokehold for 15 minutes, um, and ended up killing this individual who apparently the only threatening thing he said is that he wasn't afraid to go to jail, because he was hungry. Like he was saying how hungry he was and he was poor, and he didn't care if he went to jail. I guess he thought that maybe he would get fed if he was in jail. I mean, they feed you slop, but at least you get fed. Um, so maybe his handlers in this corporation justify this crazy stuff they do because they think, well, now we can track people who agree with Nick. Well, we don't know everybody who agrees with Nick. Not every one of them is going to be easy to track, and you don't necessarily know until the next Kyle Rittenhouse shoots somebody thinking he's going to be a hero. Um, I really shouldn't be killed for a tick. I mean, if I'm going to get killed, I'd like it to be martyrdom, standing up for the planet, standing up for women, standing up for children to be free of military recruitment, something important, not just randomly killed for a tick. That would be a really unfortunate way for my life to end. Um, I've always been rather willing to accept martyrdom in part because, um, once I became more aware that my body was breaking down in these ways, it's hard to value the rest of your life. But now that the Grand Lodge has come and developed with Dr. Rao, they developed this treatment, which is revolutionary and really solves the problem. In about 5 minutes of the treatment starting, the ticks go away and can stay away for days. Um, if insurance covered this, I would be able to lead a normal life. But instead, I have to beg from private entities because of the way we've got this capitalistic system. And at the same time, we have these capitalist informants who are desperately trying to turn somebody else in because of their own indiscretions, essentially justifying violence against people with similar problems to myself. I hate to say it, but in some ways, I'm lucky that I'm white because it probably would be a lot worse for me to have Tourette's like this and be African American, as we just witnessed on this subway. Apparently, you can kill a black man and not even be held for questioning for more than a couple hours in New York. It's baffling. I think anybody else ends up dead, they're probably at least going to hold the person for 24 hours, and New York just let them go right away. And I think race has something to do with that. So there are people who are far more marginalized and far more vulnerable than me. And they shouldn't be killed either. This is a disaster. And it's absolutely on the feet of people like Andrew Tate, Nick, Milo, and Kanye West for empowering this nonsense. This dialogue has to stop. Nobody needs this hate speech. They're not going to clean up America by beating up homeless people. They're not going to clean up America by forcing people into mental health institutions and forcibly drugging them. What they could do is maybe provide uh, like if I had the TMS, I'd probably actually be able to get that job in customer service. I've been able to only put my foot in my mouth maybe 2 or 3 times so far while we've been talking. Um, but for the most part, I haven't been having ticks. I haven't been, I was able to help clean up the apartment today. There were some ticks while I was doing that, but how it had been before I had treatment. Everybody in the apartment complex knows that I have Tourette's at this point. Um, but today, I don't think anybody outside of the small group of people I was working with knew that I had these tics. So they were much more controllable, and I was more able to do things. Um, with treatment, I'll at least be able to sell plasma. Without treatment, even selling plasma at the plasma center is difficult and dangerous. Um, so this is something I absolutely need. It's not my fault. I've had some of this problem since I was a kid. But the ticks have gotten a lot worse, particularly since the COVID pandemic. And similarly, also the fake news and the antics of the COINTELPRO creeps and gang stalkers has just gotten way out of hand. So Dale and Paul, two people I don't like to give too much attention to, um, they essentially have been similar to Milo and Ali Alexander, who was one of Nick's henchmen, who was behind the Stop the Steal thing. Have Ali Alexander has been sort of outed for um, soliciting younger males for nude photos that may have been used for I mean, a lot of times nude photos of people are used for blackmail, particularly if they're conservatives who aren't necessarily wanting to be out of the closet with their same gender attraction. So this is something that's very disturbing that he was asking for. And Kanye West goes from Ali Alexander to just jump more into the hornet's nest with somebody who's even more like that, with Milo, who for um, essentially his fall from grace was openly endorsing, what did he call it? Consensual relationships between 13-year-olds and adults. I don't know. He's English, so their idea of consent might be a little bit different, but in American law, that's certainly not consensual. That is absolutely ridiculous. Uh,
Even in English law, that's not supposed to be there. So he got exposed for the groomer and predator that he was and is.
um, I don't know. The standards in England do seem a little bit different. I think the what was the one? Seville. Like it seems like as long as there's not a complaining witness, they don't care nearly as much. Like in America, it doesn't matter if you bribe the guy afterward. You're still going to jail if you assault a child. I feel like America actually is really um, advanced compared to Europe when it comes to youth protection. Youth protection in America is no joke. We don't want to deal with that crap. We are sick of it here, and the law is very much not going to go that way. But at the same time, the FBI is very capable of manipulating elections with hysteria over this. So the QAnon nonsense used fear of pedophilia rings to steer elections. And similarly, that's kind of what happened with Anthony Weiner, why we got Donald Trump in the first place. In general, there isn't a vast child molestation network, but the rumor that it is very useful to people in power for demonization and manipulation. And we never know. We can't trust fringe crazy figures like Paul or Dale. Dale definitely seems to have some interest in grooming activity and basically presented himself on his own blog. Like nobody propped it about this. He just sort of came out with this uh, stuff about how heroic he was because he could have assaulted somebody and chose not to and only harassed her across state lines until she set him down gently. Like his own narrative of it is just absolutely sickening. But somehow he's escaped prosecution, which certainly makes it seem like he's part of the corporate troll farms that pollute the internet, and Lord knows how much they encourage and that they're not able to catch. So they're not solving any problem. They're making these problems worse. What we need is for people to, be able to trust authorities enough that when there is abuse, they can go to the authorities and know that something's going to get done. And
Well, unfortunately, just to sorry to interject here for a quick second. The authorities really don't do anything if the person is a protected, corporatized troll farm employee, or if he's an informant or an intel asset. It's like this Douglas Dietrich character that I dealt with. This
hmm,
guy was defaming people, doxing people, swatting people left and right under the sun, including myself. And no normal person can do this and get away with this. I even had an investigator in July of 2022 show up at my home because there was an anonymous complaint and he admitted that on his latest April 13 show that it was him and that basically I was abusing my parents. So when the investigator showed up, he interviewed myself and my parents and realized that was a total lie. And I gave him a copy of the police report that I filed against Mr. Dietrich. I called San Francisco police, like, hey, this is what's going on. I got the timestamps, I got the links, I got the evidence. There was even somebody that showed up at my house. So please help me out. I'm trying to do the right thing by reporting this individual. So so they said, okay, go to your local police, file a report, send it over to us with the evidence. I did all of that. And this person a year later is still on the air, defaming people, slandering people, doxing and swatting people, and nothing got done about it. So how can you go to the authorities when the enemy is protected?
well, it's a little bit different when there's a child victim. Um, but yes, when it's somebody who's a political target that the system wants to marginalize, there's a lot less help for them. And that means the FSO is on their own. We're not able to get help from the authorities when we're abused and when we're targeted by essentially the authorities' franchised out corporate henchmen. The authorities basically, in Chicago, they're often called CIs, but there's basically become businesses about trying to become CIs to get this immunity. Because if you're a witness in a more important charge, maybe Dietrich has something on some other case. If he's a witness in some other case, they don't want to jeopardize a witness for something they consider minor. And unfortunately, the family drama that they caused out of state for you, while certainly a nuisance, might not I don't know. I'm pretty sure whatever Douglas, he's so full of shit. I can't imagine anybody. I can't imagine him having real information of value. But he'll probably tell any lie he has to. I mean, I hear he drinks blood.
Yeah, so this character, see these people when you get him in front of in front of a judge, and I would rip him to shreds if it was in a courtroom with the evidence that I've collected so far. And their lawyers will always defend these freaks. Oh, he's a performance artist, like they did with Jones when he got brought up on the Sandy Hook thing. But that's the thing. This person is claiming. So what he himself is guilty of, he's accusing other people of. So he's saying he's the son of Hitler. He's drinking blood, going to this estate in Silicon Valley of young boys, right? A lot of his stuff on the Kings of Edom and the Chochoa, he plagiarized that from H.P. Lovecraft mythos and claims it as his own. A lot of his illustrations, he steals that from Asian cosplay artists and he claims it as his own. And his basically his handler is this guy named Peter Moon, and this guy is supposedly ex Scientology. I think he's still a part of it. Who's his handler and joins him in the defamation and slander and destruction of others, which is a Scientology tactic of what they do to their enemies. So, I mean, what do you do against these people? You have the evidence, you report it to the authorities, you try to do the right thing. They report and dox and SWAT people. And at the end, what kind of trust do you have in a system that's trying to entrap you or mess with you? And the benefit I had growing up in the post 9/11 world is we were taught how to identify alphabet informants that were in your communities. So if somebody came to you and started talking bad about America, like America's this, America's that, 9 out of 10, they were a government informant that wanted to rile you up and entice you so they could set you up and entrap you. So I've dealt with people like that in the past, but I was always way ahead of the game because at one time we even had a police chief in my local area, and these guys were practicing for mass casualty drills and things like that. This was like in 2014 and 2015 when the whole Islamic extremism and racism was on the rise. So I know how to identify these people. And Dietrich also identifies enemies of the state, where he says Japan won World War II, but then he's trying to see who agrees with him and starts bad mouthing America because he's
There's
just
nothing
there.
like two cities being nuclear fires for a victory, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So he's there, and what he does is he squeezes info out of his people that help him. So when time goes on, he tries to blackmail these people and tries to entrap these people, and then he starts slandering, defaming, and doxing and swatting people, along with his Scientology handler who has joined him for the last year or two in this activity.
There is an enormous amount of corruption, and historically, there is often a lot of corrupt type of secret witnesses. And it's why, in an honest and good court system, you have a right to user. Um, but in America, that sort of right is particularly since the war on terror. We've got a explosion of empowerment of scumbag informants, many of whom are dodging prosecution themselves and having to turn somebody in. They need a bigger screw up than themselves, and the often so like the head of the Proud Boys got convicted. He was an informant, but he's still going to he got convicted. Often this is what ends up happening is when informants don't want to be informants anymore. All of a sudden, a friend from 10 years ago wants to call up and seize them, and they get in the car with this friend saying, "Oh, wow, I always wondered what happened to you, missed you." And then they find out this friend just, I mean, so many people I've heard of, this particularly seems to target the African Americans in Chicago. um, a long lost friend, right as your probation is up, shows up and wants to go out, and the day your probation is off, he drops a gun in your car, and then you're both caught. And so, like, once you're trapped, the system uses it as a way to enslave people, and it's incredibly vicious and abusive towards minorities who have less of a voice. I guess I'm lucky because, in part, because of my Tourette's, I have a certain amount of bravery. You can't really threaten me. I'm determined to stand my ground and do the right thing because what are they going to take from me? I don't really have much of a life. I'm, needing medical treatment just to lead a normal life. So there's only so far I can be pushed before I simply will try to my best to expose the methods and tactics of how this fake news goes. One of the examples I like to use is when Beyonce's sister beat up Jay-Z in the elevator right before Beyonce's sister's album came out. Because often these informants will fight other informants in the troll farm to kind of create these polarized battles, and then they'll both sort of rat on the people who, sided with them. Like, one person will say that, like, they were attacked and this person's attacking me, and they'll try to get their friends and followers to defend them in a way that bends or breaks the law, and then they can turn this person who was loyal to them in. Um, and that's another of the basic methods and tactics that go with this corrupt double bust system. And there's also a lot of sexual abuse, particularly of young minority women. We've seen reports both in Los Angeles and in Chicago where when police sleep with informants, it's called a sex scandal. It's not called an abuse scandal, even when they're underage. Because I guess the abuse was maintaining the cover. I can't figure out an actual justification for that, but that seems to be the justification that they want to use. But, like, once again, a sex scandal as opposed to an abuse scandal, where they're essentially committing extortion against an informant who had some sort of vice crime, but now is being sexually abused. And, if she tries to say no, all of a sudden, they're going to find a whole bunch of drugs or something in her bags or something, and they want her to be addicted so that they can continue to abuse her. And we've seen that in Chicago. We've seen there was a big scandal, and for some reason called a sex scandal and not an abuse scandal. So even these informants who think they have immunity, they're getting screwed in more ways than one. And it's abusive as can be. And, you know, I mean, I can't stand Nick. I think that this guy is a sadistic person with a dark sense of humor who gets off on sadism. But even, knowing how corrupt the system is, I hope, for the sake of his family and his loved ones, he considers honesty and not doing this stuff anymore. He's not helping anybody. I can't really see anything from Milo other than doubling down on the corruption and the evil. And certainly Kanye West seems to have just gone in. He's essentially putting himself on the national stage to tip an election. And from what we've already seen, despite the fact nobody, I think, supports Kanye West at this point, he gets enough free publicity that they will probably be able to influence at least the Republican primary, if not the full-fledged election. And if they can choose who the candidates are, that's essentially the bipartisan combine in Illinois that led to CIA operative Barack Obama, who literally admitted he worked at a CIA front company called Business International, which produced fake news during the Cold War, and then during COINTELPRO came to Chicago to be a community organizer. So we've had, president after president connected to this one way or the other. Both Barack Obama's people and Donald Trump's people are completely connected to this sort of system of abuse and lies. And once one starts to see that it's not just these crazy clowns, sideshows of the day, that this is actually a design, and Trump doesn't get elected without Anthony Weiner. That's the big thing. Without the FBI and Anthony Weiner, we wouldn't have had Trump. And all of the people who were dead because of Trump, you know, we'd at least have had more democratic accountability. Um, I'm not saying that I really was a huge fan of Hillary Clinton. A whole bunch of the stuff that she did in supporting spy wars in Syria also led to a lot of deaths. But the reason she's able to get away with it is because whenever the Democrats get caught actually, totally supporting genocide, oppression, and refugee crises, they can always find a right wing clown who's going to make an ass of themselves. Which is basically what Nick and Milo are, right wing clowns who make asses of themselves. Um, so I think I've said everything that I've basically planned for, trying to get the methods and tactics of how fake news and informants are influencing elections, harassing
Yes.
minorities, and whether you're Catholic, whether you're Muslim, or whether you're seeking the light of the Bayan, these people are going to come after you, and they're targeting all people of faith. Anything in America that can be used to organize dissent or resistance when the government does something bad is something they're going to want to spy on and co-opt.
And you're right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. We have to have more discernment in terms of who appears in our communities, who shows up. And it's unfortunate. I've seen this trend where 90% of the people in the truth communities, in the love and light communities, in the spiritual, religious, occult communities, whatever have you, 90% of them are government informants or agents of some kind of COINTELPRO. And that's why, whether it's this Dietrich character or the individuals that you have mentioned, why they continue to get away with everything that they can get away with, regardless of the evidence, eyewitness statements, police reports, people going to the authorities, trying to do the right thing. These people are still operating and doing what they're doing. If your average person is doing this stuff, they would not get away with it.
No,
So,
these people have sort of a franchised corporate troll farm, and that sort of system ends up protecting them. They're just
yeah.
doing their job. But apparently their job is to lie, cheat, and steal and enable abuse. So this is something that should not be a job. This is something that's essentially unregulated, and the government ends up basically benefiting it from it one way or another. So it's not taking the initiative to put a stop to this. Another example I think I have to bring up about how fake news totally can influence world events is Vladimir Putin blew up his own apartment buildings. Only the United States wasn't doing fake news, we would have had the confidence to call him out years ago, and this whole problem wouldn't have even happened.
Yeah.
In some ways, I've been soft on Russia because I like to criticize NATO and their proxy war problems. But the bottom line is Vladimir Putin, I've said this for years, blew up his own apartment buildings. He blew up
Yes.
his own apartment buildings, tried to blame Chechens, got caught red handed, but thank the United States for not making a big deal about it. We could have. We could have not. I mean, United States is Vladimir Putin's best friend because we're trying to help him scare Europeans to give us more money. That's that's our game plan right now. Europe, be careful. Do not trust us. Take care of yourselves, and know that we're using Russia as a stick to make you suck on a carrot, and you don't want that carrot. You don't know where it's been. Um,
Oh, brother Stephen, it's been an honor, privilege, and pleasure as always, and I wish you nothing but good health and peace, my brother. And please, before we conclude, anything that you would like to mention, or any concluding thoughts, or anything that I failed to ask you.
well, tomorrow is my mother's funeral. Uh,
Mm,
I'm going to be focused on trying to bring my family together in this time. And it's good to have been able to say this now because some of this stuff, while I feel that it's not very speculative, I can basically prove everything I said. Uh,
Yes.
and there wasn't any guesses here. We've got the evidence. Vladimir Putin blew up his own apartment buildings. Um, and but this sort of stuff doesn't really necessarily go over well in family things. So I'm glad I've made my statement now, and I'm going to try and focus on the pain and the loss of my mother, and making it so that that she's well remembered for all of her great Boy Scouts, for the community, for the high school. She was a lunch lady for years. It's a thankless job, but she loved doing it. She loved seeing the smile on the faces when people were, you know, she liked to make food that was healthy. That was one of the things that she knew that her job was to provide healthier options. And she took a lot of pride in that. Obviously, she did this as a job, she did it for money, but she enjoyed being able to help the LT community. And now that Nick Fentus has given such a Fuentes has given such a bad name to LT, it's important. In some ways, it's good because LT's done a little bit of a reality check and is looking at its own privilege and looking at how racism had been in the shadow of this community for quite some time. Um, and it's good that if there's one good thing about Nick's antics, it's that the community has soundly rejected him. Nobody wants to be associated with that nonsense. It's evil as can be. And, he can claim it's all about Kanye West songs and how much he likes hip hop and A Tribe Called Quest when he does his interviews with No Jumper. But the community doesn't want anything to do with you, Nick. And half of your audience are trolls that are spying on you anyway. They're just like you, just less successful.
Yes, and I think that pretty much sums it up. And for your mother, may God rest her soul in peace. And you also have a heavenly station with your mother because heaven lies at the feet of your mother, what we're taught in the Islamic perspective. And you loved your mother, you served her, and she also served humanity. And Muhammad Ali says that the rent we pay on this earth is our life in service to others. And she did that very well in her occupation and how she dealt with her children and in her occupation. And also, she passed away in the month of Ramadan on the martyrdom of Imam Ali on that day. So she's a heavenly soul, my brother. You are lucky. And I wish you nothing but peace and happiness and comfort as you tomorrow bring your family together and remember your mother and her legacy and what she would want us to continue doing in this earth.
We are very satisfied with God. Thank you.
Thank you so much.